Hey, Miles,
Yeah, Cam?
have you ever heard of High Noon?
Not a Western.
Do not forsake me, oh my darling, on this our wedding day. Do not forsake
Hello,
me,
people
oh
of the
my
internet. I'm Cam,
And I'm Myles.
and today at Have You Ever Heard of, I am going to introduce, or have introduced Miles to the Western High Noon. And like I said, it's a Western, was released in 1952, directed by Fred Zinnemann, where we meet Marshal Will Kane, who is portrayed by Gary Cooper, as he is celebrating his marriage to Amy Fowler, played by Grace Kelly, and he's planning to retire. However, the celebration is short lived as he receives news that a known criminal is arriving on the noon train and will likely come after him and his wife. So, will he leave or will he stay and fight? That is the question. Interesting thing that did not actually occur to me until reading up on this. This actually took place in real time. Did you notice that?
I did notice that now that you say it. It is pretty interesting to see a film that takes place in real time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times with movies, of course, everybody here knows, they skip certain things, and sometimes walking hundreds of miles gets done in a few seconds, whereas, something very important and time-consuming can take hours, even though it's just a couple seconds.
Or a 24-hour period happens in one 40-minute episode.
Exactly, yeah. So having something done like this is kind of an interesting thing to have take place. I know there are a few films that have done stuff like this before. There is one TV series, I believe it's called 24. They do everything in hour intervals, and it takes place over the 24 hours. So it is known that it does this, but this is probably a pioneer of its time, because back in, when was this done?
1952, early 50s.
Yeah, back in the early 50s, they probably never really thought about anything like that because, well, they're too busy trying to make their point with their cinema.
Or they're just, cranking out as many films as they can, especially since this is a Western. Now, Miles, did you like this?
Not really, no. It's a Western film, and I've never really been a fan of Western movies, so it doesn't really appeal to me all that much.
You don't like Westerns?
No,
Wow.
I find them to be... I guess I should start off by saying, when I watch a movie, I usually get very emotionally involved.
Right.
And I like the emotions through the movie. And I find Westerns, they don't change anything. It's the same thing over and over and over. I compare it to the basically superhero movies that come out these days. Emotionally, they are exactly the same. There is no real change, and I'm not a big fan of that.
You know what? That's fair. I honestly completely understand because I don't watch a whole lot of Westerns either, and the ones that I do are very much ones like this that break the mold, very specifically because they're different. And I like it when things are different. But so you didn't like the movie, but does that mean that you wouldn't recommend it to anyone or?
No, I could recommend it to others, people who do like Western movies, especially if I feel they're stuck in a rut when it comes to media. Then I'd probably push this towards them, have them open up out of their shell a little bit. I'd probably recommend this to my dad, but he may have probably already seen it.
It's entirely possible. I wouldn't be surprised if my dad or my grandpa has seen this and it just goes into that, oh yeah, we've seen that just like we've seen every other Western from the time, just because. All right, well then in that case, I think we're gonna get into some spoiler territory, so I'll put on a little bit of music and we'll see you in a little bit, folks.
Perhaps Hang 'Em High by the Long Divide.
Well, maybe. We'll see. And welcome back, everyone. We're going to dive into High Noon, just a little bit more in depth about the plot for what's happening. So the known criminal, turns out, was a person who Marshall Kane had arrested and sent away. He thought he was going to get hanged, but he wasn't. And instead, he just kind of was like in prison or whatever for 5 years. And now his brother and a few other friends are there to welcome him back into the town. And that's kind of what the whole problem is that the town is kind of okay with them being there, kind of not okay, but very much the Marshall is having a problem because he's the one who locked him up. Which, of course, is the main reason why some people say he should just leave, because he's the problem. And he's all, no, I'm going to stick to my guns because, I'm still the law. And one of the things that, again, makes this kind of like a breaking the mold film is that even though at the end he has the standoff by himself, even though he tried to get a posse of the townsfolk together to help him out, and not enough people showed interest, or people that he felt he could rely on, and so he has to do it himself. And then at the end, when everyone's like, hey, great job, you killed the bad guys, good for you, and then he just takes off his martial star and throws it into the dirt and just leaves in disgust. That's not usually something that happens in these kinds of films. What did you think about that, Myles?
Well, it is kind of odd that the director decided to make a movie about a guy who can't get the rest of the town behind him. And this does make me ask a few questions, especially about this hardened criminal. Who was he again? Harvey Pell?
You mean Frank Miller?
Yeah, Frank Miller. I have to ask the question. Like, I know Gary Cooper did not like Frank Miller, but my question for the director, would be, what did Frank Miller actually do? Because clearly he wasn't a sheriff, right? He was a warden, or...
Well, he's a marshal, right?
Marshal, that's what it was, yeah.
Yeah, this takes place in New Mexico, and at the time it's New Mexico territory, so it doesn't have statehood, so they don't have sheriffs, because they're under the auspices of the federal government. Sort of like how the territories here in Canada, they're under the auspices of the RCMP and all the other federal agencies, because they're not provinces.
Yeah.
So same deal. That's why he's a marshal and not sheriff.
Yes. So much like the territories, he would be a marshal, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So the marshal wanted him hung. He wanted him out of there. But my question here is, what exactly did he do? Because they took him to prison. They locked him up. They kept him there for 5 years, but they didn't kill him. You'd think he'd be strung up or something, shooting line. But they didn't do that. They held on to him, and then they released him. So initially my thoughts were, he probably isn't that bad of a person, if that's all they're doing.
In comparison to, like, again, we're frontier town, right? So not exactly beacons of, humanity out here.
Yes. I have to ask, like, perhaps he didn't do anything really all that wrong. Or the other thing that it could be is maybe he's related to somebody who is powerful and doesn't want that, that mark on his name, or, or, maybe he likes him and just says, no, that's not going to happen.
That's something that's never covered. And I think, again, this is one of the issues of being trapped in a Western, especially a Western of the time, is that they don't go into details about that. It's just assumed by the audience and the people making it that he's a bad guy because they said it. We said he's a bad guy. He went to prison. He was supposed to get executed, but he wasn't. So he's back. And now we have to go out there and shoot him and get justice ourselves. That's just like, that's how a Western is.
Yeah, and this is the reason why I don't like them, because they clearly state in different areas that, like, most of the town actually is okay with him.
Yep.
Now, a lot of the women are like, no, we don't want that scum in our town because, our kids can't run around and have fun. So we are really stuck between a rock and a hard place for who this guy is and what he's doing. For all we know, maybe Gary Cooper was actually the bad guy in the group, or was the wrongdoer. Maybe he wronged Miller, and that's kind of where they headed to. It doesn't really say, and it kind of ticks me off, especially when they are saying things like, oh, when they don't actually say outright, but when they show with their actions, the fact that the town didn't want to jump behind the guy who is protecting the town to, get rid of him. So, like, where does he stand? Why is he this way? Did the wrong person die? Like, who knows? Maybe Miller got to town and didn't see Cooper there and just said, whatever, I don't care anymore. None of my business what happened.
I mean, that is certainly what they want us to think, too. I mean, because the mayor wants him to leave, because as soon as they get the telegraph, and the mayor's like, oh, they're coming back, okay, you need to be gone now. And, like, they don't seem to have any problems worrying about, the new marshal's not going to come until tomorrow. And it's like, no, I'm pretty sure they're coming here for you. That's the only reason why they're coming back to our town, is because you're the one who tried to get him killed, and he doesn't take kindly to that.
So, another thing I was thinking about, because this has a lot of ties with government, especially this mayor.
Mm-hmm.
One theory that I did have, and again, I have no proof behind this. This is just sort of my own little conspiracy about the whole thing.
Oh, it's kind of fun to think about that, though.
Perhaps the mayor was actually getting paid off by the new government officials, because about every 4 or 5 years, the government would change.
Yep.
So perhaps the people who are in charge of that government turned around, new set of boys in, and they said, you know what, we don't want any supplies getting through here for political reasons, and we're just going to pay you to shut you up, and, we're going to bring him here, and he's going to make sure that everything happens the way, make sure nothing gets through. I could see something like that happening.
Yeah.
But again, that just leads me to think, like,
that gives me Deadwood. That gives me Deadwood vibes, actually, because that's like one of the bases of Deadwood, the HBO show, is that very much Deadwood at the time is part of a territory, and so it's a frontier town, and so there's all this crime and everything that's going on there because they don't have statehood and protections that would come from that. And then kind of an overarching plot is to try to, if the Dakota Territory becomes a state, it needs to be done just so that all of the crime bosses can still hold their power, but in a more official way. I mean, I know you're not really into Westerns, but, like, I don't know. I always thought Deadwood was kind of not a Western.
So Deadwood is a pioneer show. I wouldn't necessarily call it a Western.
Fair enough.
But my issue with Deadwood is it follows a very similar, again, an emotional profile and an emotional ride that AMC does very often. They've done it with The Walking Dead. They've done it with Breaking Bad. They've done it with, to some extent, Prison Break. Not so much there.
Oh, okay.
But it was just sort of when it was starting to get used to that kind of stuff. And I'm just so tired of all that. Like,
well, I think it's fair to say that maybe AMC took that from Deadwood, because Deadwood is an HBO show, and by the time those shows that you just mentioned came out, it had been finished for like 3 or 4 years.
That's very true. I can see that. And HBO does fall for a lot of that stuff too, that I've seen. And it's just not my jam.
Not a fan of The Sopranos, are you?
No, oh my God. Oh.
We'll talk about that.
Cleanser thinking about that.
We'll talk about that another time. Let's go back to talking about High Noon, why don't we? Okay, what are your thoughts then about the town? Again, because they have that mixed reaction, but it seems to me that if I recall who was actually the most excited for Kane, or not Kane, that's the marshal, for Frank Miller and his buddies to come back, were men, and they were all the kind of the hooligans, hanging out at the saloon and all the other...
Yeah, those 40, or I should say 40, those like 20 to 30-year-olds, the ones who want to, strike a name for themselves, or I guess you could say they were bored. I would say that they were really bored, and they're like, oh, this guy's coming back. That means it's going to be fun again. We're going to have action here. And they kind of stayed quiet, of course, when
Marshall's around, right?
Marshall's around, because they're like, we don't want to get involved in this. We actually want to enjoy ourselves. Honestly, I think that town was actually pretty boring by the looks of the way things were going, which, don't get me wrong, boring is safe, and there's nothing wrong with that per se. But I mean, like, this is the reason why sports was made, is to keep people more entertained and keep them from getting bored and getting into trouble in that.
Right.
Don't get me wrong.
Placated, right?
It totally backfires every now and then. There's tons of riots, including here in Edmonton. Things get out of control because the team actually did.
Right.
We didn't necessarily win. We just did okay. But
that's okay. Vancouver and Montreal still have us beat when it comes to hockey riots.
Oh yeah, I'm okay with that. But yeah, I guess the real question is, with these people getting so bored in that, like, do they need a war or something?
Well, I mean, I don't. Oh,
who knows? I think those people just needed some action.
All right. Well,
and when I say do they need a war, I'm not saying do we need a war, because we're getting placated, or we're getting a little tired of everything.
I don't know, man. I mean, we just wrapped up the war in Afghanistan. I mean, it's a couple months after now, but I mean, we've got that hanging over our heads. So I don't know how badly we need to go and just mess up someone else's life again.
Well, to be fair, I've always been somebody who said that, I agree with, I believe it was my social studies teacher way back in high school. He said, when all of the victims of World War II die, we're going to be ready for another World War, because
no one will remember.
Yeah, no one will remember. No one will be around to, take the cane and bash this stupid person talking over the head saying, what are you talking about? This was a terrible thing and terrible time. A lot of people died, and even after the war, there were still consequences. Mm-hmm. Like the First World War, after that, we got the Spanish flu that happened and went around.
Right, yep.
So it's, we'll forget just how bad it would actually be. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. I think it is right. I hate to say it.
That is, that doesn't seem like something that you want to say, but...
Yeah, I don't want to say it, but it makes sense.
Well, let's kind of go on to a different track then. So, we seem to be just like batting 1,000 in terms of watching movies and shows that have strong female characters so far. And this is no exception, because both of our leading ladies, our characters of Amy Fowler and Helen Ramirez, are pretty strong characters, I would have to say. Wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. And it is nice to see in these older movies that women's roles are being taken a lot more seriously. One thing that I've came across on the internet is a lot of people tend to forget that women did actually settle the West. By all means, the men were out there as cowboys doing their cattle ranches and, herding them and all that.
Right.
But ultimately, if women weren't there, they would all just be in camps. There wouldn't actually be any cities or any towns and any things going on.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that, even the most powerful people in those positions or of making the towns generally were women, or they were motivated with women, or not with women, by the women, because guys are out there, they're working hard. Mm-hmm. After about a month of herding cattle, you come back, what's going to happen? You're going to want to celebrate. Best way to do that back then was with prostitutes, and your money goes basically to them. And now this girl has your money, and a lot of the brothels were actually ran by women, and a lot of that money, that meant that money, that woman had the ability to take that money and say, okay, I want a church. I want a school. Right. I want to have a bigger store.
Yes.
So they actually played a huge role in settling the West and turning it into a country and not just territories.
Right. And I mean, we see that too with Senora Ramirez, in that she is she owns a business, and when she decides that she's not going to stay around, I guess there's another person that has gotten Miller's attention, because she used to be with him back before he was in prison, and so with him coming back, because Kane is there, it's like, oh, great. I don't want to be around because I don't want to be fought over by a guy who is maybe not exactly women's favorite person. And so she decides that she's just going to sell and leave. But everyone treats her with like pretty high level of respect, I'd say. The only person I think who doesn't do that is the concierge at the hotel, and he only does that towards Amy because he wants a cat fight.
It's very true. I can absolutely see that.
Again, boredom, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this place definitely needed some team sports or something. Have they not heard of Cow Patty Bingo? Was that not invented yet?
I mean, perhaps not. One thing that I want to that kind of struck me as kind of interesting in doing some background research preparing for this was that, so Grace Kelly as Amy Fowler, this was like her first big role before she went on to be a darling with Hitchcock and doing some other big Hollywood films. And apparently, critics did not like her performance. They thought she was mousy and she was very timid and just like did not really bring a great performance for what was given to her. Which is interesting because I actually really liked her character. She's supposed to be anti-violence to the end until she finally makes the decision that she doesn't want her husband to just get gunned down. And so she goes and kills a man too. Like, that's a pretty strong character arc, I'd say.
I personally, you saying that the critics didn't like her, I don't know if they knew what a Quaker was.
That's a very good point.
And maybe they were just too embarrassed to look it up. Because I think I agree with you. She was... I would even argue and say that she wasn't timid. She made her point very clear. I do not want you to do this. We are going to leave, and we're going to leave this all behind us. Mm-hmm.
Again, like the thing that I found most interesting is reading, some choice quotes and things like that. And again, like timid and mousy was descriptions of her character. And I sat there going, okay, I mean, maybe compared to Helen Ramirez, who is very much like in your face and very blunt, sure, but that doesn't mean that she's not making strong choices.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on this, man. It's just I got no argument there.
It's just so strange to think about. Like,
it is. You know what? Like, maybe it's because they really, really wanted to see two women tear each other's tops off and fight. Maybe this movie isn't as old as it isn't in. Like, maybe this movie is just as old as the year that they say that they're in.
Oh man, that's funny. But I mean, I feel like there's something about the Quakers that you aren't really a fan of, which I guess makes you enjoy her arc more.
Well, I'm not a person who is anti-violence per se. Don't get me wrong, I don't say that violence should always be used. The way that I look at it is, if violence is being used, you should be using it too. There's no point in trying to, like, if you can de-escalate it, you should try to, but at the same time, if fists are being thrown, knives are being pulled, saying, hey, let's talk about this,
it's gone too far.
The time came and gone.
Right.
It's a little too late for that. The time for action has been brought forward. And I'm not a huge fan of... I'm not going to say I'm not a huge fan of people who are anti-violent, because being anti-violent is a very strong thing, and it's in general a decent idea, because I will agree that, especially in this era, violence was used probably a little too much. I mean, take a look at where it came from before. You still had people doing duels and that, and they just changed from sword to pistol.
Yep.
And I personally, like, if violence is being used, you should definitely use it. And she, you know, I applaud her for her choice of being anti-violence.
Mm-hmm.
But when push comes to shove, and she felt that her husband's life was worth killing somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
she did it because she believed in what he did and how he's acting and how it would benefit the town. Whereas she believed in that more than her stance
Mm-hmm.
of being nonviolent.
Right. So, interesting thing with the way the ending happens, with him facing off against 4 guys by himself, and then of course she saves him from getting shot. This film was considered anti-American by a reasonably high amount of people that watched it, and also by John Wayne, who was actually originally supposed to be the marshal in this. And he very specifically was upset with the way the story was, and this was actually one of the things he didn't like, was the hero getting saved, because that's not the way things are done in the Westerns. Certainly not in John Wayne Westerns.
Well, I guess it's a real question here because originally I thought the reason why he thought it was un-American was because he ended up asking for help and nobody came and stood with him.
Well, there's a little bit of that. That was another thing that he felt was un-American, was that the fact that so it's one thing to go off and just say, I'm going to do this all by myself, and every time someone says, no, you need some help, and you just say, nope, this is my fight, don't get involved, and that's just fine. But the way they frame it is that the townspeople turn him down when he says, I don't want to face them alone, because if we show a strong response to them, they'll probably just go away. And, you know, they're not going to come back. So that's all we need to do. We just need to show them a united front, and there will be no violence, hopefully. But be prepared, you know, have your guns ready and everything. So if we have to be a firing squad, then we will be. But the fact that everyone turns him down, that's another thing that's un-American, is that that's not the way this is supposed to be done. If the marshal is the law, then they should do what he wants. They should be by his side. And the fact that he isn't, or that they are not standing with him, like, that's just not the way you do this. Like, that's not very heroic. That's just, no one's being painted in a good light, I guess, is the problem.
My question about this then is John Wayne an ultrist or objectist? Because
he's very Republican, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Republicans can also be objectists or ultrist.
I know.
They're mostly objectists, though. Absolutely. But, I mean, I guess from the standpoint that's being presented, I'm not going to paint John Wayne with the brush. Saying that
feel
he is,
free to.
I'm not going to talk about a guy who's passed away, and at the end of the day, say he's not exactly as everybody else thought, because we're going to get a lot of angry emails and all that.
I mean,
but ultimately, from this point of view, it makes me really feel he's pretty ultralist. He believes in that community strength over the individual. Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty outstanding of him in terms of Republican.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he doesn't feel that you should have the hero get saved by a woman. Like that,
I guess.
Like that also just kind of like sticks in there a little bit. It's just like, okay, someone did come back to help him out, and it was one of the people that absolutely said that they wouldn't. So I mean, like, isn't that a good thing?
I think it should be.
Why is it not? So why is that considered anti-American?
Maybe it's just John Wayne's idea of what America is.
Oh.
It's. I guess it's that old-timey belief that we just don't share anymore about how, like, women don't play a role. And
or if they do,
or they shouldn't.
Yeah.
What was that old saying? It was said mostly with children, but I believe some people
they
tried
should
to say
be seen and not heard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What a stupid way of thinking. I don't know, like
ignoring things like behind every strong man there's an equally strong woman. I mean,
I can argue that.
I'm sure you can.
Because I could bring up a lot of sources, but
that are strong women just acting on their own, or
both.
Okay.
I mean, like, my sister is a very strong, independent woman.
Right.
I would argue that Ivana is with Trump in that. I wouldn't say she's as strong as he is.
Right, but
don't get me wrong. She can pull her weight.
Mm-hmm.
She absolutely could.
That's I don't know. That's different. Like Trump is just one of these weirdo people that just like that's it. They just kind of like overpower everyone else around them just through sheer strength of personality.
Yeah, I guess you're right there.
So I don't know if that's a great example to look to. Or maybe it is.
I mean, Keanu Reeves and his not wife.
Yeah. I feel like that's maybe a little bit different, especially because Keanu Reeves was not in a relationship for like most of his life because his fiance got cancer is that I can't remember exactly what it was, but she passed away. Yeah. And then he was just like, that's it. I'm just never dating ever again.
That's actually not entirely true, Cameron.
Oh, really?
Sorry to say. One of my cousins actually did go out on a date with him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was one date. I'm not going to get into who it was or how that all happened, but I remember them talking about it. And he did try. But at the same time, he was very quiet about everything he did, which I think is honestly a good thing to do because he's one of those people that a lot of people like to watch and a lot of people generally like to idolize. And he doesn't want to break that for them.
I see.
Am I saying Keanu Reeves is a bad person? No, I don't think he could do a bad thing. He's obviously was depressed for a very long time, and that changes who you are. Like, take a look at Robin Williams. Same sort of ideology, and the same sort of I shouldn't say ideology. Same or similar issues happened with him as Keanu or Reeves. I should call him. I shouldn't call him by his first name. I'm his friend. I would love to be his friend, but I'm technically not. So Reeves had sort of similar things happen with him. And he did kind of withdraw to keep that from getting out. But if you look at everything he does, he's absolutely thinking about all the other people.
Yep. Well, I mean, we have plenty of evidence for that, considering like all the things that he does for the film crews that he works with and bringing people back to work with him when he does other projects and stuff like that. You know, he cares about everyone in his life.
Absolutely. And even if you're not part of his life, he still cares. Like there's those videos of him on the L or on the train where he stands up, he's like, "Oh, take my seat, please. By all means, you know, I can stand. It's not a big deal." And it shows just how good of a person he is. And I'm sure his not wife, his significant other, is just as amazing as he is. But we don't really know very much about who she is and what she could do, right? So is she as powerful? Is she able to pull a presence like he is? I don't know. And that's my main argument about that.
And I mean, who's to say that they want to do that, right?
Oh, I doubt they would. I highly doubt they would. It would have to be something very important. And honestly, if he's standing behind something, that's something we should all definitely take a look at.
Right.
Because there's a saying, and I used to follow it pretty closely. I used to live by it because I was the quiet kid at school. But when the quiet kid talks, it's usually the loudest. And that's not because he's vocally the loudest. It's because he doesn't talk. And therefore, when he does, it's something that is probably important. And people generally listen because they don't hear him most of the time. And they stop and they kind of go like, what does he have to say? Why did he say that? What's the reasoning behind it? Those words that are spoken, even though they could be quiet, still resonate because he doesn't say much.
Hmm.
And now that's coming from a guy who's on a podcast, a talking podcast. So I've kind of, I guess you could say I flipped a little bit.
Well, I mean, as far as High Noon goes, there's lots of good stuff in it, right? You admit it's still like a really well put together film. It's just not your cup of tea, though.
No, not really.
And that's fine.
Like I said, I'm more than willing to talk about it because I like to talk.
Mm-hmm.
I like to discuss things. Like you, I'm willing to get into nitty gritty about just about anything.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, would I watch this again? Probably not.
All right.
It's just not my thing.
And that's totally okay.
Absolutely.
There is no problem at all with that. And I think this is actually a good place to wrap up here, since I think we've covered quite a good amount of ground with this.
Oh yes, this was a good. No. This was an excellent discussion about a movie that I don't want to watch. And
this is good. If every future episode where we have something where someone doesn't like something goes as well as this, we're golden.
Yes. One thing I do want to actually mention to all of our listeners out here is please, if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or whatever it is now, subscribe to us. Leave us a review. Let other people know about us. And please, get a hold of us. Tell us about some of the interesting movies or shows that you guys have seen and would like to hear us talk about or even discuss with us. We could probably find a way to hook something up and talk to you about it and have you talk about your experiences with it with us.
Absolutely.
We're totally fine with doing that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because with more experience comes better outcomes.
Yep. You get a little bit better at what it is that you're trying to say, and you start connecting more big ideas, and next thing you know, your brain is firing all the synapses all the time.
Yes.
We are going to have a new Twitter account and a new Facebook page coming up as well. So there will be more places to see us, and we will have more information on that.
And talk with us as well.
Yep. Yes. More avenues for you to engage with us, which we, as much as we love talking to each other, we love talking to other people too. Maybe even more.
Maybe. So yeah, once we figure that out, another thing that I would also like to point out is we are considering changing the name of the podcast. If you guys like it, please shoot us a message. Tell us that you want us to keep it. I don't know if any of you guys know this, but there is another Have You Ever Heard of out there, and they have their own podcast. We were first, but technically
they're more popular.
Well, they are more popular, and they've been putting out stuff more periodically than what happened with the last host in Cameron. So by all means, get a hold of us. Let us know what you think about us changing our name. Let us know if you want us to keep it. Tell us. Talk to us.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, we're going to say have a good day.
Yep. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Not forsake me, oh my darling. You made that promise when we wed.